Hezbollah's leader has condemned the killing of Hamas's deputy leader in an airstrike on Beirut earlier this week and warned Israel there will be no ceiling and no rules if Israel does wage war against Lebanon. Joining me now to discuss this is Fleur Hassan-Nahoum, who's Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Julia.
Thank you very much for joining us. We're also still joined by my guest, who's a former military advisor and intelligence officer, and that is Philip Ingram. We'll get his thoughts in just a few moments. But Fleur, I mean, look, there's no question really about who would have been responsible for this airstrike that clearly targeted Hamas leaders in Beirut. I'm all in favour of us getting rid of terrorists, whatever way we can do that. Is another terrorist gone is a good thing. However, there is this big concern that this is going to escalate the war in the Middle East. Israel fighting a war effectively on two fronts in Gaza and against Lebanon, against Hezbollah in Lebanon. We've got the Houthi rebels. All these groups, by the way, funded by Iran, taking on ships in the Red Sea. How concerned are you that we are looking at a major escalation in the region and possible risk of an all-out war?
Well, this has been escalated from the first week. It's not new that Hezbollah has been attacking the north of Israel since the first week after October 7th. How do we know this? Because we have 100,000 evacuees from the north of Israel, many of them actually in Jerusalem. And the reason why they are across the country and they've been displaced is because Hezbollah has been shelling and Israel has asked the residents of the north to leave for their own safety. And the only people who are left are the elderly and infirm who don't want to leave their homes. So we're already in a much wider conflict since the first day. Secondly, this has already become a wider conflict. You've got the Houthis and you've got Iran giving orders and the Red Sea routes. You've got an international coalition to protect the Red Sea routes. You've got Hezbollah and Iran threatening the Straits of Gibraltar, where I'm from. And so this has already become a much bigger conflict. And the reason is because Iran is behind this. And what people don't seem to understand is that Iran is the Hitler of today. And if we keep appeasing them and we keep thinking that the problem are these other proxies, then woe on us.
But that's one of the reasons why we know the West is so wary, particularly the US and Britain, that they don't want to take on Iran. I mean, we had the war in Iraq. Iran is a completely different kettle of fish. It's a much bigger country, much bigger population, incredibly highly militarized, highly armed, and as you say, the funder of pretty much every terrorist group in the Middle East.
Why don't we want to take them on?
How do you take on Iran?
Why don't we want to take them on? The people are dying for us to help them. The Iranian people are miserable.
Well, particularly women. But
absolutely.
Look, periodically Israel has, unofficially, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, taken on Israel in terms of, the nuclear weapon development and the like. And everyone says, no, 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 Israel, but secretly says, thank you very much for doing that. But let's face it, we have no appetite in the West, certainly in America, particularly, by the way, if Donald Trump wins the next presidential election in November in the US, for the US being involved in the Middle East. And Israel can't take Iran on their own. So this would involve the West being involved, and they don't want to get involved in Ukraine. They don't want to get involved in the Middle East. That's the concern for Israel, surely.
Well, look, we're not going to take on, I doubt, I'm not a military expert, but I doubt that Israel will take on Iran on its own, and it's not Israel's problem. We're just the first stop on the tour of them turning the world back 500 years, and threatening the free world, essentially. So it's really not on us to take on Iran on our own. I think that if we don't actually plan for this, eventually we're going to have to do it. I mean, the West and the liberal world and the free world is going to have to do it anyway.
That's interesting.
It's going to get the way that it got to Hitler. Everybody thought, no, it's okay. Let's wait until he started invading, the whole of Europe and not just the first or second country that Germany wanted to invade. It's the same story. We don't seem to learn from our mistakes.
The US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, is travelling to the Middle East, is going to be in Israel. Do you feel in Israel that you are getting the support you need to take on not just Hezbollah, Hamas? Obviously, this is where it all, I know it didn't start. We're talking about many, many decades, hundreds of years, thousands of years of history. But in terms of the post-October the 7th era, are you getting the support that you believe Israel should have, given that we know behind the scenes and publicly there's a lot of Western governments, particularly the US, saying, you know, you're going to have to curtail some of your actions in Gaza because of the large number of civilian deaths, particularly of children?
The world understands what we're up against. I think the world, I mean, and I tell you something which is surprising that sometimes people don't realize, the moderate Arab world know exactly what we're dealing with, because Saudi Arabia kicked out its Muslim Brotherhood. The UAE and Bahrain kicked out their Muslim Brotherhood 10 years ago. So they know exactly who Hamas. Egypt kicked out their Muslim Brotherhood, the Salafis, you know, only a few years back, and Israel actually helped them. So I think the moderate Arab world absolutely knows who Hamas is and what we're dealing with, that the enemy also is Iran. And I think for the most part, I think the Western world, the Western countries have supported Israel. You've got, you know, two fleets, we've got an American fleet in the Gulf that are staying because of the Red Sea route problem. We've got the British government who've also been very, very supportive. And so I think overall, the West has realized that this is something Israel didn't start, and this represents a much bigger problem. This brutality that we saw on October 7th is the same brutality as ISIS, is the same brutality that have killed so many Christians in the Middle East, you know, so many, so the Yazidis, so many examples of this type of sort of fundamentalist, Islamic jihadi fundamentalist brutality that threatens all of us, that I do believe that we have support from the West. I know this is a legitimate war in the eyes of the West, and we have to dismantle Hamas. That is our mission. We have to dismantle them, because we cannot live next to them anymore.
I would say also
they have no desire to live next to us.
Dismantling of Hamas will also benefit the Palestinian people. The question is what happens to that 2 million plus population of Gaza, because the interesting thing is, of course, is the Arab countries who profess so much support, they don't want them, as we know. Thank you very much for joining us. Fleur Hassan-Nahoum, Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem. Really appreciate you taking the time. Still with me is Philip Ingram, former Senior Military Intelligence Officer. It's interesting, which was talking about, you know, moderate Islam, moderate Arab world. And I mean, again, such as the Saudi leadership is moderate, for goodness sake, or Qataris and things. I mean, they're not. I mean, they're not the Lib Dems, are they? But they may be the equivalent but in that part of the world. But the reality is the leadership of a lot of these countries, very different from what the people think.
Yeah.
Say in Jordan, very sort of more modern, you know, moderate leadership. But, you know, half the population are Palestinians, for goodness sake. They're fully behind Hamas.
The Palestinians are increasingly behind Hamas, and that's an issue for Israel's third front, which is stability in the West Bank. A lot of the Arab nations described as the moderate Arab nations are completely against what Hamas stands for with the Muslim Brotherhood. And you see, Egypt hasn't opened its border.
But it's more about shoring up their own regimes, isn't it?
They
don't want that destabilisation.
It is, but it's the historical destabilisation that's there. And as I said earlier in the programme, there's still that Sunni-Shia civil war that's been going on for hundreds of years.
Do we need to take on Iran, though? Fleur is saying, look, we're going to have to take on Iran. In the same way, like, look, do we need to take on Vladimir Putin?
Militarily, taking on Iran would be a complete and utter disaster. Yeah. It is far too big an area for the world, and for the Iranian people as well, but because they are relatively strong militarily, massive geographic area, very difficult to get concentrations of troops and bits and pieces in, and we are short of ammunition and weapons. As we
haven't even got enough to fund Ukraine, and they're actually on our doorstep. How do you think this all ends? Do you think this is all going to peter out?
No, I don't think it's going to peter out. I think we need to start to take this seriously. We need to start to prepare for the potential of a bigger conflict.
In 10 seconds, do we have a political leadership in the West that is capable of this?
No, and it's not especially in 2024 with all the elections.
No, that's another thing. Democracy is quite destabilising, funnily enough. It's been an absolute pleasure having you company. Thank you so much for joining us today.